Welcome to The Brooklyn with Pooch and Colin. My name is Colin Helwig, Brooklyn Nets beat writer for Nets Daily. Today, we're clocking in for episode number 35 of the podcast. The Nets, they're back in action after the All-Star break. Despite a worthy campaign from Michael Porter Jr. and a Rising Stars appearance from Egor Dëmin, it was a break that, for the most part, excluded the Nets. At the time of recording, Brooklyn is 15-39, tied for the league's fourth worst record. I think there's 4 teams with 15 wins right now, so kind of a bottleneck there. But whether Brooklyn deserved more All-Star related love or not, they're going to march on. We're going to do the same. Erik Slater of ClutchPoints is here to help us guide us through Brooklyn's restart. Erik also does the Locked On Nets podcast. He's also the second biggest Giants fan / Eagles hater on the beat. Erik, thanks for coming on, man. How was the All-Star break from you? Did you get up to anything fun?
It was good, man. Just some R&R, chilling, watching some other sports highlights and whatever content I could get going on with nothing happening. But yeah, just chilling, ready to get into the stretch run of the season and some college basketball stuff, getting a little bit into the draft prospects. That was kind of what I was up to.
Nice. Did you enjoy watching the Nets last night, or happy to be back?
Tough Nets performance. And honestly, coming out with a back-to-back against the Cavs and the Thunder, it was somewhat expected. I will say they were a little bit more lethargic out of the gate than even I anticipated, but I was fully expecting them to get a beat down during that game, especially with Nick Claxton sidelined against Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley. That was going to be a tough task for them to hold up against that front court.
Yeah, they very much got just destroyed in the paint. James Harden being there to facilitate around the offense, move the ball, get it in there, definitely did not help either. So now the Nets, they're back to their losing ways. A lot of teams are doing that as well. Tanking, it's a conversation this time of year every year, but it seems to really be, topical right now. Home stretch of the season, it usually just gets more egregious as we get to the finish line. Shams, he posted a tweet yesterday. The NBA is looking at a variety of ways to stop it, freezing picks at the deadline, no repeat top 4 finishers, lottery odds being weighed over 2 years, whole bunch of stuff. Erik, just what's your kind of opinion on the matter? I know we've talked a little bit, but how do you think tanking should work, and how do you think the Nets should handle theirs?
Yeah, I think tanking, I've described it as a necessary evil in the NBA. And, it's something that no team wants to do. I know fans get really riled up about it, but it's not like there's front office executives and coaches and owners sitting in their offices saying, oh, we can't wait to lose all these games. Like, they don't want to do it, but the NBA has structured itself in a way where it's beneficial to stack losses, especially, if you're trying to go after a top prospect like this. Like Adam Silver even admitted it himself during the All-Star break during his press conference. The middle is the worst place to be in the NBA. You want to be, one of those contender teams, playoff teams, or you want to be one of the teams going for a top talent in the draft. And that's where it has fallen. And I think that it's really on the NBA to change that, because as long as you have incentive structures where losing is beneficial to teams, those teams are always going to act in their best interest. So it's on the NBA to change it. And from the Nets perspective, they should act in their best interest, which is to lose a lot of games right now. And obviously that's tough for some fans to see, but I've been pretty adamant that it's the best route for them to go in terms of their long-term outlook and putting themselves in the best position. The way I've described it is, if they can win 20 games versus 28 games, and that's the difference between them getting maybe a Darryn Peterson or a Cam Boozer versus a guy at the bottom of the top 10, it's kind of a no-brainer in my opinion. So the Nets should try to stack losses during the second half of the year, and I don't know that they'll have to try that hard because they're not that good of a team. But if they are trying to get ahead of some of these other teams that are also really bad and tanking very hard, they're going to have to take some strides. And I think that we've seen them do that increasingly going from last season to this season, and then as this season has progressed. And I think we'll continue to see a trend in that direction the further we get to the end of the season.
Yeah, it really feels like the pressure is really on for them to do this and do it the right way and do it now, because, obviously they don't have control over their first rounder next year. And if the NBA all of a sudden, deploys all these rules, it's obviously going to change it. This might be your last chance to tank, as we know it, just lose as many games as you can and, get yourself in a good spot. One of the, I was just on the train the other day and I had this idea, and I want to shout out Will Nets fan on Twitter. He posted something very similar. He actually went back on it, but he actually brought up the idea that, this is something that we're trying to quantify right now. And no matter what happens, teams are going to find a way to get around it. I almost feel like the only way is to take the numbers out of this, take the wins out of this, put together like a jury of some sort and have them sit around and look at talent team, look at injuries, look at, just where they at and really like come to an understanding of who is the worst team and who deserves the most pick. Now, I know when you put people in a room together, it's probably not what Adam Silver wants. It's going to be even more calls that there's collusion and, conflicts of interest and whatnot. But I'm curious, have you seen any other or thought of any other kind of radical, I guess is fair to say, ideas to change it that, you're a fan of or just kind of top of mind right now?
Yeah, I'm sure the fans of the teams that don't get picked to have the number one pick would react very rationally to that towards that jury who snubbed their team. But interesting idea. I mean, there's a lot of ideas. A lot of them sound kind of crazy. Like that one sounds crazy, but like you need some crazy. Like you need some ideas. Like I've seen other ideas that sound even crazier than that some smart people are actually considering. The idea, I talked about this on Locked On Nets last week during my mailbag episode. The best solution that I've seen, in my opinion, is picking a point in the season, whether the trade deadline, the All-Star break, whenever you want to say, somewhere at the midway point, where you flip things. And after that point, instead of losses counting towards your lottery record, you count wins instead. So the way I described it is like, if you look at the Nets record last year, they had 26 wins, 26 wins before the All-Star break, and then they had 22 losses after the All-Star break. So if you flip the incentives and during the second half of the season, those wins actually count towards your loss column and the losses actually count towards your win column, you're actually incentivizing winning. And a lot of people say that the NBA needs to find a way to disincentivize losing. And I think that that's true, but I think that they need to take it a step further and they actually need to incentivize winning. So under the, kind of proposal that I'm bringing up, if your wins count towards the second half of the season, towards your lottery record, you're going to have teams going for it. Like this is the point of the season. We're in it right now where it just drags along and the product is really just abysmal. And if you flip it this way, you're going to have teams during the second half of the year that are going all out to win. Like you have teams, it could also make teams who are bad buyers at the deadline rather than sellers. So for example, like you have, the Wizards who brought in Anthony Davis and Trae Young. You have the Jazz who brought in Jaren Jackson Jr. You have the Pacers who brought in Ivica Zubac. Instead of sitting all of those guys and trying to prolong their injury diagnoses, you'd actually want to play those guys. A guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is, sidelined right now, and it frankly would be pretty stupid for the Bucks to bring him back. You'd want to play him and you'd want him to come back. So the NBA needs to get the incentive structures back to a place where winning is what is prioritized. And sure, this is only for half of the season, but that is the half of the season when the product is usually the worst. So that's the best solution I'd seen. And I hope that it's one that the NBA will seriously consider.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned the product, and I think that's the complete product of the NBA and how it's being kind of, warped right now is an underrated part of this. Cause you can say, like, all right, let's put on the Nets against the Wizards. And it's like, all right, this is a bad game. But then when the Wizards play the Thunder, that's two real like extremities on both sides. But, those Thunder fans will gladly take the free win, but that's not a good basketball game. You want both teams to be trying. That's kind of the core. That's the basis of all competition. So I think if they can find a way to make it work, kind of what you talked about, where once again, in this scenario, the Nets are trying to win games, and fans watch the team and can root for a win. That's how it should be, and that's it would be nice to see, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I hope that they take some strides, and I hope that I hope that they seriously consider something along those lines, because at the end of the day, you want to root for wins, and you want teams to all be putting their best foot forward and competing at the highest level. That's what basketball is all about. So I think that would be a decent remedy to the situation.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, wherever the Nets end up, we certainly hope that they land some talent. I saw that you had Corey Tulaba. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Tulaba, yeah.
Yeah. So he was on your pod this week. It's beginning of draft season, maybe not draft season, but looking at draft prospect season. March Madness is coming up. He mentioned Kingston Flemings, that he said the Nets had interest in him. How did that conversation go? Could you tell us a little bit why you think, he might be a good fit on the Nets in your eyes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Nets, obviously, like all the talk has been about those top four guys, Darryn Peterson, AJ Dëmin, Cam Boozer, Caleb Wilson. But no matter how hard they tank, the Nets, are going to be at best a coin flip of being in the top four. So there's other prospects outside of that top four that they are going to be realistically looking at. And Kingston Flemings is one of those guys. And I fully understand why they would have a lot of interest in him because he is a dynamic athlete who also has scoring and passing ability to boot. And I just think that he is a very high level guard. And you look at the way that he's operating as a freshman against some of these top teams around the country who are throwing a ton of pressure at him. He's handled it really well. And I'd say that in the limited amount that I've gotten to actually like dig into his tape, he kind of looks like a Nolan Traore on steroids. Like he's like has that burst, he has that downhill juice, he has that speed, but he also has above the rim finishing, explosive athleticism, strength, like those areas where you really have the questions about Nolan. Like, yeah, he can create those advantages. He can get downhill. He can pass. Is he going to be able to finish at the rim? Is he going to be able to be an efficient jump shooter from the mid range or from three? Like Kingston brings that downhill juice and more, and he also can finish above the rim. He can shoot from three decently. He's a very good mid-range shooter at this point, and he's a really good passer. And then defensively, that athleticism also plays really well. So he's a player who I really would understand why the Nets would want. And there's going to be a lot of fans who say, they took 4 point guards last year. How can you take another point guard? And they're pulling their hair out. Look, I understand where you're coming from. I'd say the top guy that the Nets picked, Egor Dëmin, he's not a point guard in my opinion. He's going to be an off-ball player or at least a shooting guard / wing long term. And then the other 2 point guards, the true point guards in the Nets picked were Nolan Traore at 19 and Ben Suraf at 26. The 19th and 26th picks, those guys, especially given like they've looked decent at points this season, those guys aren't going to preclude you from taking the best player available if you think that guy is a point guard. So Kingston Flemings, I think he's a really good prospect. And you look at some of these guys that the Nets have, like a Noah Clowney or like a Egor Dëmin or like a Drake Powell or whatever other guys you want to say, guys who perceivably can be floor spacers but aren't natural like on-ball creators. You get that guy who can collapse the defense and who can truly score from 3 levels while being a facilitator. That's going to be a good fit next to a lot of those other guys. And that's why I think the Nets will have interest in Kingston Flemings. And there's a lot of other point guards, whether you talk about, a Darius Acuff, a Michael Brown Jr., Keaton Wagler, kind of a point guard. Like there's just a lot of guys, a lot of guards in this class who are really good. And I think Kingston will be one of the guys who the Nets will have interest in.
Yeah, I think, and I'm not blaming anyone who hasn't tuned into the Nets this year, but I think, that reaction of, oh, what are you talking about? The Nets drafted 4 point guards is very much a test of, have you watched the Nets this year? Because Jaeger will bring the ball up from time and time again, but he does not, play like a normal point guard does. It's really Nolan. And we hear about Jordy talk about his paint touches and him seeing the floor, being a facilitator, all those things. He really does seem to be the true point guard. But I totally agree. The Nets, this is one of the worst teams in the league. And you know what that means? It means you get to draft for talent. You don't draft for fit. And, I haven't had the chance to watch Kingston a lot, but I think you mentioned some of the athleticism, the shooting. The guards that the Nets have, with the exception of Drake Powell, more so the athleticism than the shooting, and vice versa. Yegor's shot the ball phenomenally this year, but he doesn't really have the speed or athleticism to get by without a screen. It sounds like he fills those boxes that a lot of their quote unquote guards are missing right now. The other guy, Darryn Peterson, has fallen on some tough criticism this past week, though. I'm curious. I haven't had the chance to. I watched him against AJ 2 weeks ago. That was a fun game, and he looked fantastic. He looked like every bit the blue chip number 1 prospect everyone said. But there has been some concerns about him going back and forth with the coach. I think he checked himself out of a game or didn't go in or something happened this week. Are you souring on Darryn Peterson, or do you think the Nets are, assuming they are lucky enough to get in the position to take him?
Yeah, it's tough to say, with what the Nets are thinking right now, because they're obviously very hush-hush about everything, especially their drafting. But you look at a guy like Darryn Peterson, and people I've talked to have said, and I think you could just see it by watching him, he doesn't have a hole in his game. And he's a guy, if you took away these injury concerns, these how bad does he really want to play concerns, load managing concerns, he's the number 1 pick, like bona fide. Like he's a 6'5" guard with explosive athleticism, elite shooting, on-ball downhill juice, a good handle, can pass, can defend. He can do all those things. He's like a 5-tool player in a sense, if you bring in a baseball analogy. And I would say that all that, in my opinion, will probably still be the number one pick. But obviously, like, teams are going to get medicals around the combine. That'll inform a lot of their decisions. Do I think teams should be souring? Look, I'm not going to say that him missing all these games, him checking himself out of games, the load management questions, I'm not going to say that teams should just disregard it, because how much you want to play, how much you love basketball, that really factors into the equation. Like, just ask people who have watched Ben Simmons, the archetype of his career. Obviously, that stuff is important. But, Darryn, like, we have seen other point guards or other, just stars like Kyrie Irving didn't play that much at Duke. There were some of these similar questions. There were questions about, other players like this, Anthony Edwards, and those guys were still, obviously turned out to be home run draft picks. So we'll see. I don't think teams are going to completely disregard it, but I think teams will get him in an interview room. They'll get his medicals and they'll get a better sense. And am I souring on the idea of taking a guy like Darryn Peterson with the number one pick? I would not. I would say no, just based on the skill set that he has and the upside that I think he presents.
Man, I was hoping you were going to say something else, and then I could, miscontort this and spread it out to other teams, and we start the narrative that no, this guy he's going to fall to like 4 or 5. That makes a whole lot more sense for him.
Yeah, I don't see that with his skill set. But hey, like, we'll see. We'll see what comes out of Kansas. We'll see what people are hearing. I mean, the Nets have two guys on. They got Jalen Wilson and Ochai Agbaji on their team. Obviously, have good connections to that Kansas coaching staff. They got Jock Vaughn. Obviously, things didn't work out here, but he's on that Kansas coaching staff. Like, I think the Nets will have information that they can get out of there, and we'll see what kind of light that paints Darryn Peterson in. But I'm pretty confident that he'll be a very high draft pick.
Yeah. One thing, and again, we got to have that ping pong ball far away first. A lot of things need to happen where the Nets get in the position to take him, but this is more so like a me thing, kind of like, not a theory, might not be the right word, but I the Nets did not draft a lot of athletes, as I mentioned, outside of Drake Powell this year. And when they drafted Egor, talked about Ben Saraff's professionalism, it seemed to me like, and in hearing how Sean spoke about it, about the players, how Jordy did, they really value a guy's approach to the game and his attitude, and how hard of a worker are you. And I'm not saying that Darryn Peterson isn't one of those things, but those are kind of like the non on the court factors. So I'm very curious to see. I still think, and I hope the Nets see that this guy's too good to pass up on. But there's a bit of concern there for me, where I would see the Nets, I would lose my mind if they didn't take Darryn Peterson like 1 overall. Like, but it's kind of dancing along that line. It's just kind of thought that crept into my head this week is this something that, they seem to be sensitive towards guys who might not have the best attitude about the game. Could that be something that, deters them here? Again, don't think that's going to happen. Don't hope it's going to happen, but it's definitely something that kind of slipped into the back of my mind. I'm curious if you think there's any sort of a dynamic where, it set off any bells or whistles for them this week.
Yeah, I mean, draft people that I've spoken to have said that everything that they've heard about Darryn is that he works his, tail off the court, and that he does love basketball. Maybe these injury concerns are legitimate. Maybe he's just trying to, prevent any kind of injury and, make sure that he is the number one pick in the draft and that he doesn't have any sort of debilitating issue going into combine time. So I don't know. I understand what you're saying, but I'd say that I haven't heard anything along the lines that, Darryn Peterson isn't a hard worker, things along those lines. And you don't really, like, sure, natural talent is a huge part of this, but you don't get to be that good at basketball without being a very hard worker. So, what do the Nets hear from Kansas? What do they hear from other people that they have connections with? That's going to be really important. And like that network of people that you gain information from, that's like the biggest part of scouting. They talked about that on the Scout series last year. So hopefully that will come, that will work in the Nets' favor when they're kind of doing their background work on Darryn Peterson. But yeah, we'll see. It's going to be an interesting thing to monitor during the second half of the season.
Yeah. And, one thing worth noting, I remember when Anthony Edwards was coming up, there were rumors about him that his just love of basketball wasn't quite there. And, now outside of Victor Wembanyama, you'd probably take him over anyone to start your team with. So it's another one. I know you had mentioned Kyrie too. There's forever one of these stories where, the guy's attitude doesn't seem to be there and it doesn't pan out. There's probably twice as many where, there were concerns or partial concerns. And ended up being nothing because good basketball players are good at basketball, and that's what matters.
Definitely.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to get into our mailbag now. I only have 2 questions today. This first one is from Matt Jasper. Erik, who on the Nets has the best chance in your eyes to become the team's foundational piece over the next 3 to 5 years?
On this current Nets roster, I would say it's Egor Dëmin, and I don't even really think that there's another great answer. I mean, like the other guys who I would think you could say are contenders are, Nolan Traore, Nolan Traore, Noah Clowney. Maybe you could throw a Danny Wolf into that conversation or a Drake Powell. But yeah, for me, it's Egor. Like a lot of people will say MPJ. Why didn't you mention him? I don't think MPJ is going to be a long-term piece here. And from things that I've heard in and around the Nets, I would expect them to revisit trade conversations for him in the offseason. I'd be skeptical about them giving him a contract extension. So, yeah, Egor Dëmin is the guy that I would say. I mean, look, I know that people will have their, kind of quibbles with his skill set. He obviously is limited as an advantage creator, as a ball handler right now. He doesn't get into the paint. He doesn't finish at the rim. I've just said that, 6'9" guys who can shoot 40% from three on very high volume as 19-year-olds can play defense and do have ancillary ball handling and passing ability that you can try to unlock. That's a player that I would feel good about moving forward. Now, is he going to be a face of the franchise, like star level player? There are very real questions about that, but I'm pretty confident that he's going to be a good foundational player for this team for years to come.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. And, you mentioned the stuff on the floor. Everything out of the teams, the coach's mouth reinforces that too. They seem to really believe in this kid. Try to be different, though. I do think, and you mentioned Traore too, but there's, just for the exercise of offering a different answer, I think there's a world where it could be him just based on, what he provides for the team right now. We don't know what pick they're going to get, who they're going to add in the offseason. It could totally change right now, but someone who can get through the first line of defense, touch the paint, throw the ball around is something this team really needs right now. And I think, their offense has been pitiful regardless, but it looks better when Nolan's out there and he's on the floor and he's touching the paint, getting through, bringing defenders in, forcing collapses, kicking it out, and, they start throwing the ball around. I think that, he's a guy where if he can learn to, maybe I don't know if he'll ever be able to put pressure on the rim, but if he can be like a Darius Garland type player where he really masters that floater, continues to shoot the ball well, threaten from the mid range and from three, and just leverage that speed, I think there could be something there. But yeah, Yegor's definitely that guy.
Yeah, and I like Nolan too. I think that, a lot of those, things that you mentioned are true. For me, the question about him is going to be, where is he scoring from on the floor efficiently? Like we know that Egor, it seems like, is going to be a good 3-point shooter, if not an elite 3-point shooter. With Nolan, he's probably going to struggle finishing at the rim because he's he's 6'4", like good size for a point guard, but still smaller relative to other players, and he's a below the rim player. And then he's obviously not a high level 3-point shooter, or even a good 3-point shooter at this point. So does that jump shot come along? That is going to be a huge aspect of Nolan Traore's development, and whether he can be a guy who can play off the ball alongside, a star level player, or can develop into a guy who's someone that you want to have, posting really high usage and handling the ball for extended periods of games. So I could see a world where Nolan develops into that guy, but I would say that there's a lot of real questions about his offensive game at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. Long way to go for him. Long way to go for really all the guys on this roster. Our next question is from Ray Cohen. Ray asks, seems like the consensus that this draft is pretty loaded. Are there any members of Brooklyn's rookie class from this last year that you wouldn't trade to get a first rounder this coming year? Obviously, where the pick is matters, but generally, are you buying anyone's upside right now over that of these new kids?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it really depends where that pick is. Like, the guy that you would say that you wouldn't trade for a first round pick in this draft is Egor Dëmin, but that depends on where the pick is in this draft. So if you're saying it's going to be a top 10 pick, I'd probably trade Egor Dëmin for a top 10 pick in this draft, depending on who the guys are. I'm not saying that the Nets would definitely do that, but I think that there's a good, case given how good this top 10 looks in this draft. If you're talking about a late first round pick, then there probably, isn't a guy, I wouldn't trade Egor Dëmin for a guy like that. Maybe I would some of the other Nets pieces, but I'd say it depends on where the pick is. But I'd said, like, in the top 10, you have those guys like Darryn Peterson, AJ DeBansta, Cam Boozer, Caleb Wilson have separated themselves. But beyond that, you have a lot of really good players outside of that. Like we talked about Kingston Flemings. You have Michael Brown Jr., you have Keaton Wagler, Darius Acuff, Nate Ament. Like all of these guys are flashing really, really high level skill sets right now. And that's why this draft has been regarded as even deeper and even better than last year's, which was already very highly regarded. So, yeah, I just say there's a lot of good players in this class. And I think that should make Nets fans excited because even if you strike out and you don't get a top 3-4 pick, as long as you push yourself up as high as you can in the draft lottery standings and you maximize or you limit your floor, there's a good chance that you're going to come away with a very good player in this draft.
Yeah, all week, just kind of an inescapable thought I've kept having is that, man, what a bummer that they didn't have the 5 darts to throw at the board this year instead of last year. And like you said, that it's not just the top 3 guys, it's, the 3 to like 12 range guys, all from what I've seen and what I've heard. And if this was last year's draft, a lot of them would have shifted into that like 5-6 area around where the Nets are picking right now. So it feels crazy to say everything we just talked about, how Egor kind of feels like the guy that, is the centerpiece of the future round right now. But yeah, I think it makes total sense. And I would definitely, if someone wanted to give us, the 8th pick this year for Egor right now, I think I would make that deal. Obviously, I would need to take a closer look at who's on the board, probably do a little bit more research. It is only February still, but that's something that, would be exciting. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's interesting dynamic, and it really just kind of shows you, the difference between this year's draft pool and last year's.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think that the Nets are really high on Egor, and I think that they drafted him for a reason. They obviously went a little bit out on a limb. They got clowned for that pick, and they've been, somewhat redeemed or have looked good for how he's played early this season. But yeah, there's a lot of high level prospects in this class, and we'll see how it plays out. I mean, Nets fans, it's pretty much draft season right now for Nets fans. Like you should all be watching these guys, and yeah, the second half of this college season is obviously going to be very informative to what the board eventually shakes out and ends up looking like.
Yeah, and it's a bummer we don't have, to want to be, that's not the right word, want to have prospects for the Nets right over in Rutgers this year. We're gonna have to tune into some West Coast games. All right, so this is our last segment, Eric. It's a new thing we're doing on a show. It's just called One Thing. So question for you: what's one thing you expect to happen in the NBA, Nets related or not, as we inch closer to the playoffs that others might not expect?
I wouldn't say I fully expect this, but maybe a Cade Cunningham MVP push, because Cade Cunningham, man, he is carrying that team, that Detroit Pistons team, to heights that few other people, I think, envisioned. I mean, I think people thought that the Pistons were going to be good. Did people think that the Pistons were going to be potentially best record in the NBA good? No. And Cade Cunningham has been obviously at the center of that. They do not have, I mean, they have a good supporting cast, but they don't have like a high level perimeter shot creator alongside Cade Cunningham. And despite that, he is carrying that team to immense heights. And he goes into the Garden last night, obviously highly anticipated matchup, hostile environment, 2 teams that are potentially going, have some bad blood from the playoffs last year and could be going against each other again this year. And he goes in and he just completely lights the world on fire. And he's playing with an attitude. He's scoring from all three levels. He's putting guys through the rim. He's playing defense. I mean, he's mean mugging on people. He's telling Jeremy Sohan, you just got traded. You suck. I just cooked you. Like, I mean, he's just playing with some fire, and he's a guy that I love watching. And I think that, look, you got SGA, you got Jokic. Jokic is probably going to be ineligible for MVP. I think he can only miss one more game. And then you got SGA. I mean, if the Pistons end up surpassing the Oklahoma City Thunder for the league's best record, Cade would have a good shot, I think, at winning that award. And I don't necessarily think that that's something that a lot of people thought would have had a good chance to happen going into the season. So, yeah, Cade Cunningham, I'm sure a lot of Nets fans enjoyed watching him cook the Knicks last night, and he's a guy that I'll definitely be watching for the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's hard to believe less than 2 years ago, or right around 2 years ago, he was at the Barclays Center and the Pistons were losing their record 30, however many it was, losses in a row. Quite the turnaround they've had. My answer is kind of in this, it'll bleed into the playoffs too, and how I think the East might go. And Maybe it's because we just watched the Cavs, dog walk the Nets for an hour and a half last night. But I'm really picking up what they're putting down in Cleveland. I think people a lot of times look at James Harden and talk about his playoff disappearances. And Darius Garland is a talented young player, but he just hasn't been available for them. And James Harden has been available this season. DeAndre Hunter, another guy where you can look at him, and if you want to sell yourself on him, you sell yourself on his upside, but just really wasn't having the season that they needed. And, you know, you brought in James Harden, and the Cavs kind of, the talk of them is that, oh, they don't really have like the toughness, the grit. That's kind of something that's held them back. Dennis Schroeder, as we know, is a pretty gritty guy. They added him too. They got Keon Ellis, who was another good defender. So even if you want to talk about Harden's poor, defense at the top of the key, not that Darius Garland was a great defender to begin with either. He was quite bad, honestly. But so there really wasn't I think the subtraction of losing Garland and losing blanking on his name right now. I said him a second ago.
DeAndre
DeAndre
Hunter.
Hunter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is the subtractions of them as being a little bit like overblown because people just look at upside in young players. Whereas the additions of Harden, his availability, still, a pro who's been in a lot of playoffs, that's going to help them. Keon Ellis, Dennis Schroeder are big. And there's kind of a bottleneck right now for that 2 seed in the East. So my answer is I expect the Cavs to surpass the Celtics, surpass the Cavs, get that 2 seed, and then we'll see what happens in the playoffs. I opened up FanDuel yesterday, to dangerous sentence to say in our world, but I opened up FanDuel yesterday just to look at the odds, thinking like Cavs, they're still, I think they're in the 4 slot right now. Probably not the favorite. FanDuel has them as the favorites in the East right now. So maybe it's not too unexpected, but I still think generally speaking, people are sleeping on them, and I don't know if they'll win the finals. I don't think anyone out of the East is winning the finals this year, but they could win the East, and I wouldn't be shocked to see that.
Yeah, I mean, they looked really good last night. And I think that you look at the James Harden trade, and some people, might have said, like, you're trading a 25-year-old or whatever Darius Garland is for a 37-year-old. But look, the Cavs are trying to win right now. And sure, James Harden does have his issues, especially come playoff time. I mean, he turns into the invisible man in game 6, game 7 of big playoff series, but still, you're swapping a guy in Darius Garland who doesn't play for a guy in James Harden who does play. And while neither of them really play defense, James Harden is 6'5" and a little bit stronger. So yeah, I think that James will definitely help them. I think we saw that last night. And they are a deep team. I mean, if they can get healthy and you have a starting lineup that has 2 on-ball guys who you can basically have one of them running your offense for the entire game between Donovan Mitchell and James Harden. You have front court players in Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen who are versatile guys. And then, yeah, you have the supporting pieces like, Keon Ellis, Max Strus if he gets back. Dennis Schroeder obviously has entered the mix. Sam Merrill. They are a deep team, and I think that they might have the best collection of talent in the Eastern Conference. If the Celtics are missing Jason Tatum, I'd say the Cavs might have the deepest and best, most well-rounded, best collection of talent. The question is, are they going to be available? Can they mesh and gel in the amount of time that they've been offered after, making the trade deadline deal? We'll see, but I definitely agree with you that they are a team that's streaking right now. They look good, and if I were another Eastern Conference team, maybe outside of the Pistons, because they're just playing so confident and with a swagger that none of these other teams seem to be able to touch right now, I'd be worried about, the Cleveland Cavaliers and what they could bring to the table come playoff time.
Yeah, when Brooklyn sent out James for Ben Simmons years past, and it seemed like everyone said, this was the first true lose-lose trade. When I was watching James Harden create for Jarrett Allen in Cleveland last night, I was just thinking to myself, yes, those teams lost, but there was a third team in there, the Cavs, who got Jarrett Allen and got pieces to one day get James Harden. They were the winners of that trade far and away, and it was blatantly obviously last night.
Yeah, it was weird watching that. I had that same exact thought. I was like, what are the odds that Nets fans thought that they'd be watching when that deal went down? The Nets would be watching James Harden dish to Jarrett Allen on pick and rolls and cook the Nets. What a weird, turn of events. But yeah, definitely the Cavs have come out looking really well from that transaction, and now they have Harden coming in, and they're going to have to figure it out. But I think that they have to feel at least decent about, what they look like going into the playoffs, given, how kind of far things had fallen from the expectations that they had in the beginning of the season. I think that deadline transaction was a good move for them ultimately.
Yeah. Coached by Kenny Atkinson too, who they had just sent out a couple months ago. All right, so that's all we had for you guys today. Erik, I want to thank you again for coming on. I'm sure most of our listeners know where to find you, but why don't you go ahead, plug your handles, let the people know where they can find you and read more of your work.
Yeah, you guys can follow me on Twitter at Erik Slater _. All my articles on Clutch Points, and then daily pods on the Nets, on Locked On Nets. No matter how many losses pile up, you will have a daily pod Monday through Friday every week from me. So, yeah, appreciate you having me on, Colin. You guys do a great job here, and always fun getting to chop it up and talk some Nets ball.
You are doing the Lord's work, my friend, with the daily pods with this team. I know we definitely appreciate it, and Nets fans appreciate it. So yeah, everyone check Erik out. Check us out at the Brooklyn Pod on X. We're on Instagram. We're on TikTok. If you want to email us, we're the Brooklyn Pod at gmail.com. Got OKC tonight. We're going to see how that goes. And then we will be back at the Barclays Center. There's a Sunday game, Atlanta. Do I have that right? It's a red team.
Yeah, it's Atlanta on Sunday.
Atlanta on Sunday. Then we're at the Barclays Center on Tuesday. So we will see you guys soon. Take care, everybody.